everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and today we're going to be making another character out of the Lilly Rose Dolls collection. Now this one is the Highland Cow. Now it comes in two different sizes, 16 inch and 14 inches, and it also comes in a male and a female version. So the base doll will be the same regardless of whether you're making the male or the female version, and then you then personalise whichever character you want with the clothes that they wear. So this one that I'm going to be making is a 16 inch, so this is Byron, and this is the outfit for Byron. There's also Kristof, who's a 14 inch character, and then there's also Emma, who is a 16 inch character as well, and she's obviously dressed in her own outfit as well. So the base doll for all of those three characters will be the same, so you'll be able to follow this video along regardless of which of those three that you're making. So I hope that makes it easier for everybody. I do want to say a really big thank you to Claire and to Richard of Lilly Rose Dolls for gifting the kit to me in order that I can bring this sew along video to you. So really big thank you to them, because I do appreciate their support, and I hope that you enjoy these sew along videos as well, and that it just takes some of the questions you might have out of actually how to construct these characters. So in a moment I'll pop up a video for you, but I call them back to the future videos. It's after I've finished recording and making the character, then I just pop back a little clip and insert it just in a moment in order to show you what the finished character looks like, and then hopefully you agree that it's a charming character that you want to make yourself, and then that'll give you the inspiration then to know that everything that I do in the video will result in a character of the finished standard that I'm going to show you. Hopefully that's helpful anyway. So I'll do that, and then I'll tip the camera down, and then we'll get started. So just pop back after just finishing the character just to be able to show you. So here's the head, all beautifully finished. Lovely fluffy hair there, and the horns and the ears. Get a little bit, straighten them up slightly, but they are even. And also I've got all the arms and the legs and the tail are all on. So just so that you could have a look at the finished result of everything that I've done. This is the actual character that I've stitched in the video, so this is the result that hopefully you'll be able to achieve too when you sew yours. The other thing I forgot to say in my little intro is that there's already a kit opening video for Byron and for everything that you get in the kit. So if you're interested in having a look before you purchase, then you can have a little look there, and that'll give you some information and show you everything that's included within the kit. But for now, I'm going to go into my lovely box for my kit, and I'm going to pull out my pattern, and I'll pull out my, oops, sorry for the crinkling, my pattern pieces. Because the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get your pattern and your instructions, and then you're going to need to trace off the pattern pieces for your character. Now I do recommend that you trace off your pattern pieces and keep your master copy of your pattern intact, because then if one of your pattern pieces goes missing in the future, you've always got your copy to come back to and to refer to. And tracing them off is quite quick and easy, you just have to get into the habit of doing it. Okay, so in order to trace off your pattern, you're going to need to add your seam allowance to your pattern. There is a note on the pattern here, add 1/4 inch seam allowance unless otherwise indicated. So I can see there's a note here, no seam allowance on his tail and on his tail end in fur, but on this body part then we do need to add some seam allowance, and that's really easy to do. But if you've not done it before, then it can feel a bit strange. All you need is a ruler and a pen. And all I do is take my ruler, find the 1/4 inch mark, I put it onto this line here, which is the sewing line, and I just put a little mark on the side of my pattern piece like this, and I just move my ruler along and just move those little dashes all the way along. I do this on my master copy because I would always sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and if we put it on the master copy we only have to do it the once. Once you've joined all your lines together, so done all your little dots, then you just go along and join those lines together, and that will give you a cutting out line, which will then mean that if you sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, then you're going to have your pattern piece or your limb the same size that it was intended by the designer. And that's really important, because if you want your clothes to fit, you need to be really careful with your 1/4 inch seam allowance, not only marking it and cutting out, but then sewing with it in order to make sure that everything fits in the end. if you want a more in-depth video on how to add seam allowance and then how to pop your tissue paper over the top of your pattern pieces and to trace it, if you look on my Lilly Rose Dolls playlist, you will see some generic videos for how to do this type of thing. That it was easier to do it as a standalone video than it is for me to go into greater depth every time that somebody watches a video, I make a video. But also I never know whether this is your first video you've seen or whether it's your 10th, and so I don't want to bore people who've already got the information when I can just direct you to somewhere else for it. And then when you've got those ready, traced off and cut out, then we'll move to working with our fabric. The other thing that you can do is you can pop your arm, body and legs onto cardboard, which is what I've done with the pattern, just glued those on. Now these are the arms, body and leg for Harvey, but I know that these are going to be the same as they are for Byron because they're the same size character, both are 16 inches, and I know that that's the case. Just make sure that you do cross-reference your limbs and your body to the pattern in your booklet to make sure that those pieces are all the same. For example, I think that on, is it Hartley the hare, then his limbs are slightly different. So there are some slight variations on some, but I know that Byron and Harvey are the same, which is why I'm going to use the same one. So if you've already made Harvey, you can use his body and legs. You don't have to trace those out again. So from your kit, you're going to need to get out your, this lovely russet colour. You're going to need this taupe colour, beigey colour, and you're also going to need the white piece, which will be for his nose. You're also going to need to find your faux fur as well, which will be for his head and for his hair. And then there's a little bit of extra faux fur there just for his tail. And we'll talk about cutting out the fur in a moment or two, so don't worry about that. It's really easy and we can give you some tips to be able to do that. So let's start working first with the body felt. When you first open out your felt, you might have some packing crease lines here. So I'm just going to press my felt with a warm steam iron in order to get those creases out, because they're easier to get out now before we start to work with the felt. So I'll do that with the beige and also with the russet brown, and I suggest that you do the same. I wouldn't recommend that you iron your faux fur because sometimes the faux fur can melt. I don't know whether this one would or not, but it's just best to not iron your faux fur at all. Okay, so once we've got everything all ironed out, I'm just trying not to waft all of my bits of pattern away, then we can then start to look at laying this out. And you can choose which way you pop onto your felt. Sometimes that you can tell there's a right side and a wrong side, but on this one looks pretty much the same on either side. And I've separated out all of my pieces. So for this beige felt we need the horns, and as you can see I've cut out 2, and that's because the pattern said to cut out 4. So if we turn this fabric into half like this, then with having 2 pattern pieces I can cut 4 out of those straight away without having to wait. It's just a preference that I do because I like to know before I start to cut out my copies that I've got the right number on there, and it can be easy to forget an arm or forget a leg if you're not careful, or that you've got to cut out extra, and if I went and cut one out in the middle I then wouldn't have room then to place my other one if I forgot that I'd got to cut 4 out of this. So whenever I have that, I'll trace off 2 of the pattern pieces and I'll put 1 of 2 and 2 of 2 on it, and both of them are to cut 2 out of it, and that will then give us our give us the correct number. So just for now, let's just roughly, I've folded this fabric in half, this felt, and I'm just going to now just put a couple of pins in just to hold that pattern piece on top of there. And with felt, there's no grain to the felt, so that means that you can pop your pattern pieces on any way you like. That's going to give you the best result and get really the best amount out of your felt piece if you wanted to. I do try to get as much out of it, so I try and put my things nice and close together so that I can have some spare felt for another project. So that's the horns that go onto this beige fabric. I've also just pinned my nose onto my white fabric so I don't lose those pieces. They can go to one side. I've then got the little bit of fur, and that's going to be for the tail. So I'm just going to pop that on the top at the moment, although when we cut it out, we'll cut it out from the rear, but that's to keep that safe. And then we've got these two semicircle pieces here, and that's for the front and the back of the head, for the hair. So again, I'm just going to just pin those pattern pieces onto the fur for the moment, whilst we're just working out where everything goes. I just find it easier to portion it out like this first before you get started, because then we know that everything else, the ears, the tail, the head, side head, the head gusset, the arms and the legs and the body are all out of this lovely russet coloured felt. So for some pattern pieces, we're going to cut 2 of them, so let's separate that out as well. My ears as well are cut 4, so again with those I've got 2 of 2 and 1 of 2, and I've got 2 pattern pieces and I'll cut 2 out of each. The head gusset and the tail we only need to cut 1 out of. Okay, let me just show you this layout on this felt for the russet coloured felt, because I think it might help you when you're laying it out. So I folded my fabric in half, so there's my raw edges there, and my folded edge is against the edge here. The first thing I placed was this one here, which is for the head gusset, and the head gusset is a symmetrical shape, so when I folded it in half along its length, it's the same on the left and on the right. So I knew that I could place this piece straddling the folded edge here, and then when that's cut out, that will give me one piece that is the same on the left and on the right. So that's the head gusset there, just along that folded edge. I've then done one leg in the corner there, that way round, and then I flipped it over and then nestled that up against the head gusset to cut out the other leg. And then I managed to fit both ears in between the gap created between those 2 legs. I then came down to this other side here, and I popped the body in this other corner where the 2 layers are, in order to have that ready. And then there was enough room then for the head to come across to the fold, and I've got the neck edge of the head, if we think that's the nose and this is the top of the head, then I've got the neck edge towards that folded edge here. But there is enough room to fit Byron's tail down below that as well on my piece of fabric, so that's where the tail has gone. And then in the middle here, in this space that's left, I've managed to put one arm up right up against that body piece, so that that's the curves match on there, so that's all nice and neat, and then the other one is just butted up against it right next to it. So that gives you everything that you need to have in on your russet felt. And as you can see, when I take these pattern pieces off, then I have drawn round each of them. And then when I've drawn round them, I've used heat erasable pen to draw around them, and then I've then just put a pin in the middle of each of the pieces. We're then going to cut them out. I haven't cut out the tail yet because I wanted to wait until that one was open up yet, so I'll keep that one to one side because I do need to cut that out as yet. So then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, you can do these 2 ways. The head, side head and the head gusset you will need to cut out and not do anything with those, because the head gusset has got to fit down the centre of the head. However, on the body, on your 2 arms, on your 2 ears and on your 2 legs, you don't need to cut these out at this stage, because what you can do is pop it into the sewing machine and you can sew 1/4 inch in from your drawn line, and that will give you your pieces without it being in separate pieces to start off. That's probably a more advanced way of doing it, and I know that's the way that Claire at Lilly Rose Dolls, the designer there, sews her body and limbs together. But if you are a beginner, I would suggest that you now cut out on your drawn line and then pop it into your sewing machine and sew round each of your pieces individually. I just think it'll be easier for you. And if you go onto my channel, there is a video for the video that I made for Harvey or for Clara and both the cat, and both of those videos will show you how to make and stuff your 2 arms, your 2 legs and your body, because those are generic across all of the characters. what we are going to do is I'm going to cut out all of my pieces now in order that then we can go ahead and sew the head, because the head is different for each character. And just another tip, I would never go onto a piece of felt with a kit and just draw out the head pieces only and think I'll come back to the body and the limbs at a later date, because you can see how closely this is all fitting together with our lines. You just can't guarantee that you'll have enough felt. So you do need to mark out all of your pattern pieces for your body and your head at the start, and not do that in two different sections. Of course, you can cut these out and then pop them to one side and then work on them later. I tend to make my body and my arms and my legs first, because once I get to the end of having made my head, I want to have a body to put that onto straight away. So I think it's a good way of doing it, whereas otherwise you make the head and the head's got to sit there and watch you while you get to grips and make the body. But also the sewing on the arms and the legs is generally easier. So again, if this is your first character, then I would recommend that you work with your body and your limbs first, in order that you just get used to working with the felt and stuffing the felt and sewing it up again, in order that then you can come onto the next video with me and join me for making the head. Okay, I'm going to get mine cut out and then I'll meet you back here. So I've cut out my head and my body, then the horns, I've pinned those onto my fabric and I've drawn round those. I'm going to put a pin down the centre of each one, but I'm going to not cut those out at the moment. I'm going to keep those intact, because I'll show you how we sew this round without cutting it out at first, and then we can then sew that with the head. So that's got that bit sorted. Let's put my pattern pieces for those away. And then for the tail, what we'll do is we'll take the back of this piece of fabric here. You need, when you're working with faux fur like this, or you just get everywhere, you do need to be aware of this overhang of fur. So generally speaking, on faux fur, you get this mesh kind of fabricy background to it. Sometimes it has a bit of stretch to it. This one hasn't. But sometimes they do, and you need to preserve this piece of this overhang, if you like, of this fluff, because that's what, when we sew this round to make his tail, that's what's going to give us that lovely long sort of bushy tail effect. If we just snip it off and we cut it straight across, we're going to lose quite a lot of that pile of that fabric. So what I tend to do is pop my pattern piece on the back of my piece of fur. And it's big. I mean, you could use it just as it is. I'm going to cut mine down though, and then draw your design on the back, whatever the design is. And this works the same for the two pieces of fabric that we're going to be cutting for his mop of hair. So I mark that on the back here. Then what I do is I take some very sharp and pointy nose scissors, and then I use my scissor blade to then part through the fibres of the fur close to the mesh background. So I almost feel along the mesh background with my scissors before making a cut. And that way you will go, so long as you don't go like that, I'm not going straight through my scissors. If I show you from the other side, so let me just do a little bit more. You have to really go slow when you're doing this. So I'm just pushing those scissors along and feeling the back of the mesh to there. So you can't see my scissors on the other side, because they're buried underneath all of this fur that's there. So it's parting those fibres, so that when I take my piece of fur off, see the cut I've made, oops, get the scissors off my fingers, then that overhang of fur is still there. And that's what you want. So you've got to just take your time when you're cutting out faux fur. And again, there is a video on my channel, as you might imagine, that tells you all about cutting out faux fur, in order that you can have a go at doing this. Let's just take your time, nice and slowly. And then down the side this way is quite clever. So just go straight down. And then when I take that piece of the extra away, then you can see that the fibres separate. And I've got the overhang on this little piece, look, with those fibres there. because if we just cut this straight across, let me just show you on this piece here, if we cut straight across and have our scissors so that you can see them front and back, then you get this really short tufty bit and you've lost all of those fibres on the bottom. So that is why we always part the fibres with the nose of our scissors as we're snipping, and then that preserves this overhang of fluff which we want to keep intact. So that's the fur for the tail. So let's just pop that pattern piece on there so I know it's not a scrap piece and it is a piece we want to keep. And you can even just pin it onto your tail as well if you wanted to, just to keep those bits intact. And I'll probably show you how to do the tail first actually with this video, because then that leaves the head, doesn't it, intact for the other video. Right, then let's go over. We've got the nose on here, and again with the nose what I would do is I would I've traced it off a tissue paper, and this is one thing that I would now cut out as one piece with the pattern and the paper together, whereas the others we've drawn round. But on this I would then just carefully just cut around this piece, and then cutting on the drawn line with something as small as this will then help you keep it intact and keep it close to the original pattern as intended. Then we've got his nose, and again I'll keep that all together on there. Goes that way. Does it go that way? I think it might go that way actually. Okay, so that's all together. And then I do save my scraps of fabric, because you can get some little berries or something like that, or a little petal out of this off the offcuts. So I do save all of my offcuts to one side. And then on this one here with the fur for the head, let's just talk about pile, because you'll see that on these two circular pieces the back fur has a pile with the arrow sticking up towards the curved edge. Well, on both of them they're to the curved edge. So both of these semicircles need to have the pile going the same way. So you can't just pop them on as they are, because one's pointing with the pile going up and one's pointing with the pile going down. And the pile is the way that these fibres lay. So as you can see, we're going from north to south with these fibres, because if I ruckle it up the other way, you can see how that's going to go. So we wouldn't then cut these pieces of fabric out with the pile arrow going across the grain like this, because that wouldn't work. The pile is going that way, and so we want to cut it out with the pile going the way that the fibres all lay. So think of the arrow as being the way the fibres lay. So if we turn this over so we know where we're going, so the fibres are all going from the bottom here where there's cut edge up towards the top where we've got the overhang, so we can see how that's all laying. And then I can take my pattern piece and put my arrow so that goes the same way for this piece here. This one here as well, this piece here is actually going to go upside down, so the pile is going the same way on this one as well. And position that one. And then I'm just pinning through the mesh back. I'm not going all the way through the fur. Just through the mesh back will be enough just to hold this onto the fabric piece for you. And that will then just give you two lovely pieces of your fur. And we're going to do exactly the same way for cutting these out. Is I'll take my scissors and I will part through the fibres right on the edge of that fabric piece and do a little snip, and just do those little consecutive little snips, but always feeling for the underneath of the mesh with my scissors before I actually take that cut. So just run the scissors along the edge. And I haven't added seam allowance onto these pieces either. And that way you'll preserve the overhang of your fabric on the edge there. Okay, so I'm just going to carry on and cut these out now, and then have these all ready. And then if you meet me back here, we'll construct our tail as part of this video before we move on to the rest. Let's just do a quick checkup. So we've got our 2 parts for the body. We've got our 2 legs, and each leg has got 2 parts to it. So there's 4 individual fabric pieces for the legs. The same with their arms, 2 pieces here, but each are made from 2 pieces. So that's 4 pieces of arms. We've then got the 2 pieces of fur for the hair. We've got 2 sets of 2 fabric pieces for the ears. We've got 1 piece for the head gusset, which at the moment is folded in half, but if I fold this out, then you'll see that's the same shape as the head gusset. And we've got our 2 pieces for our head. We've got our little piece of white felt for our nose. We've got our beige piece of fabric, which has got our horns marked on it but not cut out yet, because they're smaller, so they're easier to work with when they're in one piece like that. And then we've got our russet piece of felt and our little tail tip there as well in the faux fur. And that then is everything that you need in order to make your character. So as I say, if I was sewing this at home on my own without recording, I would now go off and sew the body, leaving a gap in the back for stuffing on the body. I would sew round the legs and then put the slit in and then stuff those. And I would do the same with the arms, so all the way around, then put the slit in and then do those as well. The rest of it we're going to then come back to. As I say, I'm going to just sew the tail now, and then we're going to then come back and sew the head as a separate video, as a part 2 video. Okay, so if you want to get your hand sewing thread and your hand sewing needle together, and we'll be able to then sew this tail. Okay, so in order to sew the tail, I've got my hand sewing needle with some coordinating thread on there. Just get as close a match as you can do. The pattern pieces, I do find it really easy to get like a freezer bag and just to have that to hand, because I think as soon as you've taken your pattern pieces off, it's a good idea to have your freezer bag to hand just to pop everything into. I know you've got the box, but if ever you go in and out of the box for other things in the future, then these little bits of tissue paper can waft away, and so I do think it's easier to have that in the bottom of your box. Okay, so the thing that we're going to do with the tail now is we're going to fold this over. So I'm going to fold it over about 1/3, and then I'm going to tuck the edge in. So you're sort of making a bit of a flat roll, if there's such a thing, really, with your tail. And then once you've got that sort of folded over and got that flattened down on the end, then you can then just pop a pin in just to hold that together. And you're just going to have to work in sections, but you won't be able to go all the way along and do it all in one go, because it's not going to actually stay for you. It's only a thin little strip, but we just need a little tail for him. Or for her, if you're making Emma. As I say, just going to pop those stitches just down, those pins just down as we go down the edge. And sometimes it's easy to get these little bits sort of crossed off the list, really. It's like making the head. I will make the ears and the horns first before I start to sew the main head up together, because I do think that it's easier to have all the appendages ready and waiting for you before you then sew the main actual head. They're all just ready for you then, aren't they, before you start. So I've pinned so far, but I can see my pins are going to get in the way. So what I'm going to do now is just start sewing it, I think, and then we'll secure it as we go down. So I've got a knot on the end of my needle, and I'm going to just go through into the felt so that I can bury a little bit of the end of the knot through. And then I'm going to take another stitch just on the edge of this tail just to hold it steady. Once I've done that, I can take my first pin out just to show that edge. And now I'm going to take some little stitches going down the edge of the tail, just holding that loose end together. And that will then sew the tail together for us. There is a little trick for how to hide your stitches with felt, and I will show you that in a second or two. So we're just taking our time nice and gently. And if you can get your stitches at right angles across that gap, that will be better, will look neater for you. And you're trying to keep your tail the same thickness or width all the way down. I'm going to show you how my stitches are looking, just like that, if you can see them. Just make sure you don't get any loops on your stitches. And try not to pull your thread so tight that you're going to get a curve in your tail. You want a nice straight tail if you can. Just tuck that edge in. Sometimes it's easier to hold it on these thin strips. And if you just want to put both sides together and then just over sew along the edge, you can do that as well. That might be slightly easier if you're finding this a little bit fiddly. Just wanted to try and get that raw edge in if I could do. I think it is possible, but it's just, as I say, it's just a little fiddlier than putting the raw edges together. Get a nice little tail though there, look, coming together. Okay, so let me carry on down to the bottom here and then I'll pop back to you once I've got down to the bottom. Okay, so once we get down to the bottom, got our lovely little tail here. And then we're going to take our tail fur. And what I'd like to try and do is try and wrap it round the tail. So let's show you that again. Sorry, I sort of got started without showing you. So we're going to have a little bit of felt at the bottom, and I've got the right side of the felt is going against the right side of the tail. But then I wrap it round, tucking all the fur inside. It'll all make sense in a minute or two. Because then what I'm going to do is, so I've got the length of the fur going down the length of the tail. You see that? Oops. Because I like to hide this top piece of the tail fur, and the way that we're going to do that is we are going to just pull the tail down so that it's level with the bottom, and then we're going to start and put some little over sew stitches in around the top of this fur to cover the tail, end of the tail. And you'll find your tail piece is too big for your tail end, but just keep sewing it on as you go round. And you can cinch it in a little bit as well, because you want the fullness, you want the tail to be nice and full and fluffy. Then what I would do is then I'm going to tuck in all of the fibres of the fur, so I pull the mesh ends together. And I'm just going to sew these pieces in and just going to cinch those bits in onto the end of the tail. It's just across that top edge. We can tweak it once we've got it finished. And then I'm going to, now I've got the fibres of the tail tucked in between the mesh, I'm now just going to do some stitches over sewing down here, and I'm going to run out of thread, which is typical, but hopefully you've left enough thread. Let me just cast off there. I've not finished stitching yet, but I'll just do a few stitches in place there, and that'll just get me to the point where I can then get some more thread. Okay, so I've got an extra piece of thread now. So I'm just going to carry on down the bottom of this fur on the tail. Got a loop in my threads. Just keeping the fibres of the actual fur that we want to see out of the way, just to make that nice and easy. Okay, so keeping my thread attached, I'm now going to pull or fold the fur down over the end of the tail. So push the tail back up into there, and then smooth all those fibres down. And I do on the inside of the tail here. You see how that's going. So that's how it is from the top now. So we've got the fibres all down, but we've not got that rough edge. You know the colour, the white edge of the fur that we'd got. We've not got that now on the end of the tail because that's tucked up inside. But what I do want to do now is go onto the underneath here, and it's a bit folding all this fur back out of the way. I'm going to fold that fur back out the way, and you've got this end that you can see in there. And I'm just going to run some running stitches just around on the edge of that fur, just inside, just sort of so the mesh can't sort of fray on me. And I'm going to cinch it in. Like we do when we do the bottom of the neck. If you've already made a character before, then you know we do something similar with the bottom of the of the neck. Just make sure you keep your fibres for your tail out of the way while you're doing this. Don't get them caught up with your thread. Nearly at the beginning again. And then when you just get to the beginning of your running stitches going around the outside, just give that a little tug and that'll just pull all of those fibres in on the end, and then we can just go across. It's just sort of closing up that circle really that you could see before. My thread's got some fibres caught in it, as you can see. Just use your point of your needle just to take those out. I'm just sewing across the end of that fabric. So this is from the inside. Oops, got some more fibres. So just take those out. It's easy to take them out as you're going along rather than at the end. A few stitches in place. And then because we've got all this long fluff anyway, we don't need to worry about having a long end on our thread. Just snip the needle off, pop that away. And it's looking a bit scraggy at the moment. Scraggy, that's a good word, isn't it, for you? But then if we just take the time, and we can just use, there's my awl. Just use the awl, and I use that just to pull those fibres down and make them into place. So they're just behaving themselves where they should go to. You can see it's kind of combing the end of his tail. Just trying to hide those fibres at the end there. Without pulling anything out, you can see now we've got a much more tamed tail really. And so that's my tail. The other thing that you can do if you put your tail down onto the work surface is you can fluff up the fibres around your stitches as well, and that will help you hide your stitches and make his tail a little bit fluffy. You don't need to do this, it's only if you want to, but it can sometimes just soften up that seam edge in order that you don't see your stitches quite so much. Okay, so there we have a lovely tail for our character Byron, or Emma, or Kristof. And I'm going to pop this tail now so I don't lose it inside my pattern bag, because that's the best way I think of finding it, along with the pattern piece for his tail tip. Okay, let me turn the camera around and we'll have a roundup. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed getting prepped and ready with me today, and getting all your patterns sorted out, adding that seam allowance and then cutting out on your felt and your fur and your other colours. And I hope you've enjoyed making your little tail. We've got that all ready to go now, haven't we? So I'm going to stop the video for now, and then we are going to now, in the part 2 video, we are going to make the head for Byron. I've forgotten his name then, for Byron, so that, and in the meantime I will work on his body and work on his limbs, so at the end you'll see a completed character. And as I say, I've linked the video previously for you, so that you, if you're unsure how to sew his body or his limbs, then you can follow the video I did for the 16-inch Harvey character, and then you'll be able to see what is done. And I think there's also a generic video as well, I think, if I remember correctly, as well, that you'll be able to follow, that shows you how to do the body and the arms and the legs. Okay, I'll see you in a few moments.